Living with diabetes is a big challenge, and I didn't realize it, did not fully appreciate it until it almost happened to me. Last October, I go to my physical checkup, routine checkup, and my blood glucose comes high first in my lifetime. And since then, my life has changed in a very big way. Hi, everyone. I'm Naveen Agarwal, and I'm so excited to welcome you to this very special session of our Let's Talk Risk podcast, where we're going to talk about the human experience, the human side of medical devices. We talk a lot about risk management and regulatory affairs and AI, ML, and whatnot. But today we're going to talk about the human side of the story and what it means to make risk based decisions. For that, I have a wonderful guest today, Rick Wedge, who has both the technical experience and also a personal experience with this very challenging condition. Rick, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Hi, Naveen. Very well. How are you?
I'm great, Rick. So I know you are a technical expert in the field of risk management and design control for combination devices, and you work at a leading manufacturer of pharmaceutical products. But today you are here in your personal capacity to share your experience with us. Tell us a little bit about how your journey started in this area.
Well, it was a strange and long journey. 20 years ago, 2007, I was admitted to hospital first with stomach pains, completely out of the blue, and they diagnosed me as having had an acute pancreatitis attack. I was in hospital for 2 nights. I was told, well, there are various adjustments to your lifestyle you should make, but you should be okay. I made those adjustments and carried on. Over the next decade or so, every so often I'd get a stomachache. Reminiscent of the original one, but not quite as strong. And the way I'd counter that was I'd sort of take a couple of Tylenol, spend the day fasting, and I'd be okay. Then cut to just before the pandemic, I had quite a nasty stomachache, and I thought I ought to get this checked out a little bit more thoroughly. And I was told, after having various scans, that I had a stone in my pancreatic duct that was causing me to have chronic pancreatitis, which is hence the recurrent attacks. I was prescribed enzyme replacement therapy, told, there are certain things you shouldn't eat. So a lot of fried food, that sort of thing, would tend to sort of stimulate the pancreas and aggravate it as a result. And again, that was fine. Went into the pandemic. I was taking medication, but I felt I had it under control. Anyway, at the beginning of 2024, I had a really nasty attack. Every year I'd been having MRI scans just to make sure the stone wasn't growing, nothing sinister was happening. I went for an MRI scan and they said, well, this is actually quite serious. You're going to need to see somebody urgently about this. And the stone had grown and my main pancreatic duct had dilated to the tune of about 5 centimeters. Now, this is, astonishing to the level that my hepatobiliary consultant who I saw said, he actually sent the data back and said, is this a transcription error? It's an order of magnitude out.
Mm-hmm.
They did some more exploratory studies and they found that what I had in my pancreas was what's called an IPMN, an interductal papillary mucinous neoplasm. It took me a long time to learn how to say.
Mm-hmm.
And that's almost like a growth, a cyst that was growing. And it actually burst through the top of my pancreas and caused a fistula. And it was looking quite dicey. So what they did was they opted at that moment to remove my pancreas altogether. You can have various degrees of it removed, called the Whipple operation, or you can have the entirety removed, which is a total pancreatectomy. And with that, they also take your spleen and your gallbladder, essentially because all the blood vessels in that particular area are so enmeshed that it'd be very difficult for them to take one without taking the other two. So they did that, and they actually did some histological work on my pancreas, and it was talk about a bullet dodge. They found low-grade dysplasia in the cells, so they were on the turn. And as we all know, pancreatic cancer has famously very low survival rates. So I was counting my blessings. Then what happened was, obviously, when you have no pancreas, you can see where this is heading from the diabetes conversation. You're rendered a diabetic virtually overnight. So people with type 1 and type 2 slowly will drift into it. There'll be a period of time where they sort of start feeling symptoms, and then all of a sudden they'll end up at the goal of having diabetes as such. With my operation, I went to sleep on the morning of the 24th of July last year and woke up in the evening and I was diabetic when I wasn't in the
Hmm.
morning. And it's quite an extreme sort of diabetes in that because you don't have a pancreas, you can't secrete glucagon. So there's a seesaw of insulin and glucagon, and insulin is regulated by glucagon. So if you go too low, there's too much insulin
Hmm.
secreted, glucagon comes in to push your blood sugar back up again. If I
Hmm.
don't have that, so it's quite easy for me to go into hyperglycemia because I don't have anything to sort of pull me back from the brink. So it's quite a tricky type of diabetes to manage.
Hmm. Hmm. Wow, what a story, Rick, and thank you for sharing that with us. I want to start by asking you, how did you process this enormous change in your life? I mean, you have been living through that pain and discomfort for a long time, but I bet you never imagined that you were going to be in this situation where overnight, in a matter of few hours, you would be diabetic, you'd lose a pancreas. I'm very curious, how did you process that?
I'm still processing it, to be honest with you. It was very difficult. It was life changing. I'm still in therapy for it. Was I have sort of mild PTSD, I was told, because it's quite. I mean, I still can't go to that part of London where I had the operation without feeling very uncomfortable. It's funny, a
Hmm.
friend of mine, we had a night out in May, and that was the nearest tube stop, the nearest underground stop to the restaurant we were eating. And I felt really
Hmm.
nervous. And all I was
Hmm.
doing, walking past that hospital, it's
Hmm.
so it has been a lot. The thing is as well with the diabetes, because my wife actually said it's very much like the period when you bring home, when you have a family and you first
Hmm.
bring home a newborn baby from the hospital. I'm sure, those of us with children will all remember that moment where you're there, you come home from hospital and there's a new baby in the car seat
Hmm.
and you're there going, what do we do now? And
Yeah, what do we do now?
it was very much like that. It was like, well, what do I do? How do I, I had to learn essentially from scratch how to manage
Yeah.
diabetes because the care, essentially, all they did in the hospital was give me two pens, a basal pen and a bolus pen, and said, right, you're on your own. You work it out. And, and then, I spent a lot of time just sitting at the table in the lounge downstairs with every meal, writing in my little book. I've got a little book where I make all my notes of how many carbs I've had, how much I have to dose, and working it out. And there are things that people don't tell you. And it took until January this year
Hmm.
before I was actually sent on the course. Our health service in the UK do a brilliant course called the Dose Assisted for Normal Eating course, the Daphne course. And that's
Hmm.
invaluable. They tell you things that I wasn't told when I came out of hospital, which carbs to count, which carbs you don't need to count. And it's fiendishly difficult and, very so. Yeah, I didn't have time to process it as much. And it's
Yeah.
only now, I think, now I'm getting more to grips with it that I'm starting to process the whole journey, if you like.
Yeah, yeah, I think this is a very interesting point for all of us in the business, all practitioners who work so hard to build these products, develop these products, and develop these systems for risk management, quality management. We have to not only think about the physical trauma that our patients feel, but also the emotional and
Mm,
psychological trauma that they have to come to terms with. So suddenly their health is more holistic. And I think we should not lose sight of the fact that our devices are not just helping them manage their condition or treat their condition, but also helping them come to terms with their new situation in a
yeah.
little bit better way. But it'll take time, it'll take a while. So we have to build this new level of empathy. And Rick, I remember the very first time you and I met in Amsterdam, it was a conference that we were both attending, a MedTech safety conference, and we were both there as technical experts and trying to mingle among people to talk about technology and quality management and risk management. But the very first time you and I met, and you had followed me on LinkedIn for a while, we started talking about continuous glucose monitors and
Mm,
accuracy and how it's affecting our lifestyle. We immediately connected, and we didn't talk about this hazardous situation or this hazard, but we talked about the human side of our
yeah.
story.
Yeah.
So I have never forgotten that. And I think I want our colleagues to kind of remember that somehow we have to think about the human aspect of the work we do. And we would not appreciate it totally unless we experience it ourselves or we immerse in this experience with other people. We can't just sit in an office and look at a piece of paper or read a journal article. So, yes, I think I'm very passionate about that. And you brought this to a new light with me. So, first of all, I want to thank you for being so open in sharing your story, but also being very, I would say, you have a very surgical precision when it comes to technical topics. Like you talk about them in good technical detail. So I want to go next with you to explore your technical journey. I know early on you started with biosensors
Yes.
and you have a deep understanding of how these devices work. And let's focus on these glucose sensors, which have kind of revolutionized our field today. So share with us your early experience with this technology and where it is today.
It's really ironic, actually, because, I started, well, I did my PhD in electrochemical biosensors, of which one I developed was a glucose sensor. I mean, at the time, the glucose oxidase, and I think glucose oxidase is still the preferred enzyme they use. My PhD was on glucose dehydrogenase, which was a slightly different approach to it. And so I spent sort of the early parts of my careers. I mean, the irony is I've spent the early part of my career developing glucose blood monitors, and the latter part of my career now developing combination products, and I'm reliant on both now to stay alive.
Mhm.
But yeah, so I started on electrochemical biosensors. Then I moved to a small startup where part of that was developing fingerstick glucose, but CGMs were merely, a dream at that point.
Mhm.
That technology just wasn't there. I then moved to another startup where we did sort of lab on a chip work, where we used extracorporeal circuits to do inline blood analyte monitoring. So we did glucose, potassium, carbon dioxide, things like that. And then I took a sideways switch and went into the pharma industry developing injector pens. And it was here that I started to sort of, my interest in all matters risk management were peaked. And then sort of the follow-on job I had from that was working for another little startup where we were developing rigid endoscopes. And it was there I really became interested in design controls and risk management especially. And then to cut to where I am now, my job, me and my team sort of develop design history files, risk management files. And, I think I wouldn't be on this podcast if I didn't have an interest. We wouldn't have spoken if we didn't have an interest in risk management. It's, it's one of those things that I really enthuse about. So it's, it's weird now. One of the things, I mean, I guess one of the messages to come from this podcast is, to anybody who works in this space is, be diligent, do your job, because you never know the point at where you might be reliant on that technology. In fact, I even selected the pump that I use on the basis of the manufacturer. I've seen their risk management procedures as part of my job, so I knew that I could rely on what they have because I've seen them, and from a professional point of view, I'm really happy with what they do. So it's like, well, these guys have done their work. I feel ready to entrust my life with them.
We'll talk about that in a moment, and I want to pick up where you started from in the biosensor space because I know that CGMs, which is continuous glucose monitors, have been a dream for the industry for a long, long time, and it's only now that it has become a reality. And I want to understand. I want to understand first what was holding it back. And before we go into that, let's put this in perspective for our viewers. I was one of those people who were at the edge of the cliff and they didn't even know. By the edge of the cliff, I mean that my A1C was 6.4, which is almost at the edge. Almost at the edge. After that, you are diabetic. So just to give you some numbers, Rick, there are about 98 million people in the US alone. 38% of the entire US population is potentially pre-diabetic, and most of them don't even know it. And I'm sure this number is very big worldwide.
Yeah, huge.
What CGM has done for me and what might it do for other people is it can help them walk back away from that cliff, from the edge of the cliff, and not go over that cliff when it becomes even more difficult to bring your A1C down. So I want you to help us connect the dots. What was holding us back in the early 2000s, and what was the key to solving this puzzle? If you can share some insights about.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, that. I mean, I think probably one of the main things is enzyme stabilization and the amount of enzyme that you have, because originally you would use the finger stick methods, and the enzyme would be stabilized on there, but it'd be one shot, be reconstituted with blood, and then you'd throw it away. So I've not worked in that space for a considerable amount of time. I'd be very interested to know how they've stabilized the enzymes on the biosensors that they use that sit on the back of your arm for, 15 days, 10 days, 15 days, whatever, and how they maintain that for that length of time. Because I'm told, I've not tried it myself, there are some sensors that you can actually restart again. You can use again at your own risk, of course. And I wouldn't do it. I've never done it myself, but I know people, and I've read on the internet, or seen people talk about how they've been caught short, say on holiday. They've not got enough sensors, and they've managed to restart the sensor they're wearing, and it's lasted them the rest of the holiday, giving them perfect measurements. So I am fascinated on how they've managed to crack that.
I also think that there were other fields that were advancing quite rapidly, which is miniaturization, which is electronics, which is Wi-Fi, Bluetooth-enabled communication with a iOS-based platform or another reader. They were maturing, and it wasn't possible until very recently to mass produce them at a cost point that could be scaled up. And now the history is very new. 2017 is the first time that Dexcom G6 received a de novo from the US FDA.
I didn't realize it was that recently, actually. You surprised me when you said that to me earlier.
Yes. And I think that opened the floodgates. And by that time, the technology was mature, the regulatory framework was maturing. And in fact, if you read that de novo, and I'll give the link to our viewers in this podcast show notes, FDA established the way to measure and report accuracy and what their expectations were about performance. So it is all there. And I think this whole framework has allowed really the expansion and scale up of the CGM technology, which I think should be treated as one of the breakthrough innovations in our Sure, it's not perfect. It's not perfect. But tell us your experience with the CGM, because now I think you are wearing a CGM that is integrated with your continuous pump, right?
So I wear a Dexcom G6. My experience is, so I'll say straight away, I cannot imagine what it must have been like having diabetes without CGM. Having only known diabetes with it. And it's interesting, when I went on this course earlier this year, there was a chap who'd had diabetes. He was about my age, in his early 50s, and he'd had diabetes type 1 since a teenager, and he refused to use them. He was just happy using the finger stick. He felt in control. But to me, I can't imagine. They're odd. They're a blessing and a curse in that you know your blood glucose all the time, but you know your blood glucose all the time. So you're always checking it, and any minor fluctuation, you're going, oh, why is this happening? Previously, you'd sort out all your insulin to carb ratios throughout the day, take your dose with your meals, get on with your life, and it only when you got to your next meal, you may be a bit high, you may be a bit low, you'd attenuate your dose accordingly then, whereas now you can see it. The best analogy I heard is like, originally, with the finger stick, it's skiing up and down a mountain range, and then with the finger stick, it's somebody just giving you a camera, a Polaroid, and you're taking pictures every so often. Whereas with you've got a GoPro on your head, and you're seeing exactly where you're going. So I think as an invention, they are absolutely brilliant. There's no way around that. I can't imagine with an insulin pump as well. That hybrid closed loop system. I mean, for me, it doesn't work for everybody, but for me, last week, for example, I've had this system for like 5 months, 6 months now, and I was in range. You're not in range 100% of the time. Diabetes isn't like that. It likes to throw curveballs at you when you least want. But last week I was in range for a solid 72 hours, and that was the last time I'd been in range for that long since I'd had a functioning pancreas. So they're incredible when linked with the right technology.
But I think I understand what you mean, because when I started monitoring my blood glucose, it's not blood glucose, it's continuous glucose monitoring, which is interstitial space. It correlates. It's related to blood glucose, but not exactly 1-to-1. But too much of data right in the palm of your hand can also be very, I would say, stressful, because you are constantly worried about going out of range and going too high or too low, and then you are cutting back on, you are making a lot of, and in fact, since last October I went on a very, very strict diet. Um, Giving up rice was the most difficult thing for
Oh,
me, because I used to eat rice with every
yeah,
meal,
right.
and no bread. I love a good bread. I stopped eating bread, no sugar, no desserts, nothing. um, it wasn't too big a problem, but it's a very big adjustment. And I cannot imagine for you, of course. So the whole point is, too much information also requires an adjustment in your approach, because you are constantly on edge. You are
Mm,
thinking, hey, what if I do something wrong and things get even worse? So it gets a little bit getting used to it. But now that we have this tool, you are right about that. The other risk actually I see is relying on it too much. And let's talk about that a little bit, because these CGM sensors can go wild. I mean, they can be way off compared to your blood glucose
mm.
value. Can you share any experience? And by the way, before we go into that, I want all of our viewers to know that nothing we say today should be treated as a complaint. And I know how complaints work in our regulatory world. We are just discussing our personal experience and sharing some ideas about that. So don't treat them as complaints and go talk to your people. Hey, this should be logged as a complaint in your system or not. So, with that disclaimer, Rick, tell us, maybe share some experience of this up and down
Yeah.
experience with.
Well, one thing they never tell you, well, one thing you never know with CGMs is the first day that you put one on, and it doesn't
Mhm,
matter who makes it. You always have a bit of a sketchy day. It just takes a long time to sort of get used to your body. They say they're calibrated in the factory, but they also need to almost calibrate to you as well.
mhm,
So I
mhm,
always know, I always dread sensor changing day, because it can be a bit of a wild ride. Today, for example, well, I've had a bit of a rocky week. Sensors fail. So after last week's high of sort of keeping in range all this time, and it was a great week. I was just saying to somebody earlier on today, I was walking around the house on Sunday saying, I've got this diabetes licked. But no,
mhm.
to see here. Monday
Yeah.
morning at 5 o'clock, I'm woken up by the phone saying my transmitter has not communicated with the device. That happens. Bluetooth isn't perfect.
Mhm,
Bluetooth fails on headphones all the time, so it's often a case of turning the phone back on and off and back on again. But then the transmitter told me it had failed altogether. Again, not a problem. I speak to the manufacturer. They'll provide me with a new one. I send it back. They'll investigate. But I changed it. But the problem is, then, with all the sensors, you have a warm-up period. And with
mhm,
the warm-up period, then what happens is you're blind. My pump's on
mhm,
basic basal settings, and so I
mhm,
always come out of that in hyperglycemia, and then spend the
mhm,
rest of the day just chasing that to bring it down. So today, for example, I've put on a new sensor, and it's working okay now. But this afternoon, I had to go for a long hour's walk. I live near Epping Forest. I had to go for a
mhm,
long walk in the forest here, just to sort of bring it back down to my normal level, because it spent the morning just going up and up and up and up. Um,
mhm, mhm, mhm.
that is that's the drawback. I mean, I think ultimately the positives are always going to outweigh any sort of slight issues. And 2017, the first one on the market, it's not 10 years old. It's obviously still in
Mhm.
its
Still
infancy.
maturing.
I
Yeah.
suspect in 10 years from now, a lot of these things won't be a problem.
Mhm. So you are basically bringing up the benefit risk conversation
Exactly.
in this picture. It happened to me also. I have been wearing this sensor for about a year now, and 1 out of the 10. It's a 15-day cycle, so 1 out of 10 was 60 points off compared to my blood glucose. So I had to go by a blood glucose testing system, and I compared that, it was 60 points off. So it does happen. And what it's telling us is that we still have to be vigilant. We still have to exercise our common sense, listen to our body, what is telling us, and take the right action with the right information. We can't afford to believe it too much. It's
Mm.
useful, but don't believe it too much. Rick, I know we could talk about this forever. I have so many questions on this area. We will have more conversations on this topic, but I want to close by asking you to share, to reflect on how it has changed your approach to work, your approach to managing
Mm.
the technical side of work, the risk management side of work, and how do you use this experience fully to bring that to work and also inspire your team?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I actually did. I mean, you saw a slide I did in Amsterdam about this right at the
Mhm.
end of my talk, but I did something a little longer for a town hall internally at work about all sorts of healthcare companies always have the mantra of patient centricity, and rightfully so. But it was always something that every you come into work, you do your job, everybody treats it in the abstract, and
Mhm.
sort of my epiphany, if you like, was, well, actually, this isn't in the abstract. It was one of these days, it could be you. And
Mhm.
that was the message I gave. So it's given me a lot more when I look at, say, risk management documents. And my phone's just beeping away. Sorry, it'll running a little low, but don't worry.
No, let's talk about that. So you see how your glucose level is going up and down, and you have an alarm, and you have to respond to it. So yeah, we'll wrap up very quickly, but this makes our conversation even more lively.
I'm not going to go too low. It's just sort of bouncing along the bottom a little way. But yes,
Yeah, I know how it goes. Mhm.
but what it's done is give me the patient's insight, and even say about a year ago, well, longer than that, we were developing a device where there was an app going to go with it, and I was quite anti the app, being like, oh, people don't want that. People just want to get on with their lives and sort of pretend they're not ill. But actually now, I've got this. This goes where I go, and I chose the particular pump, not only because of I quite like the manufacturer, their risk management. The app it comes with gives me all sorts of data that
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
love, and I like piecing through that. But sorry, I'm digressing. In
No,
terms
you're
of
good. You're good.
in terms of
Mhm.
the insight it's given me, the insight that I give to my team and colleagues is that this is important, and one day you may be taking this medicine, you may rely on this device, so it's
Mhm.
important you get it right, or your
Yeah,
family.
I think I'm going to push back a little bit for the next few minutes or so and ask you this question. We all have heard that many times, but still there is something that makes us in the moment make assumptions. And hearing this story, I can always see that is that we begin to make assumptions about the user experience from our perspective that we have not really experienced that.
Mm.
And how do we inspire our colleagues to have that level of empathy and build that empathy muscle? No, we definitely don't want people to experience a health condition like you are experiencing
Mm.
or I was about to experience. We don't want them to go through that experience to build this insight. How can we help them see the value in investing some time in building this empathy muscle? What will be your message to them? I agree with you. We have heard this all the time, but
Mm.
still it is not translating into practice. At least that is what my perception is. So what can
Yeah,
we do more?
that's a very interesting question. Um, Other than sort of, this is, I feel certainly with the situation I've been in, I've been given a unique vantage point, certainly
Mhm.
in my industry and within my peers, to discuss this and sort of to press home the importance of it, because it is, I go back to my original thought that one day it could be you, and I fully accept, because I've worked in companies where we've brought in people, we're marketing a drug for X condition, and people come in and say, oh, you've changed my life, this is brilliant, and then, well, this is great, and then you just go back to work. And
Correct.
yeah, it's crossing that divide, and I guess maybe it does take people who you work with saying, well, wait a minute, I suffer from this condition, I maybe asking me what I think of it, rather than sort of thinking in the abstract of how it works.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
guess getting out there into the industry and talking to people and saying it isn't abstract, and as a user, this is what I would think. And maybe, yeah, you do speak to users as part of it, but they don't have the, I don't know, maybe the agency to change within that maybe somebody like you or maybe
Mhm.
I have with
Yeah.
our unique position.
Well, I think this is exactly why we want to have conversations like these on Let's Talk Risk. We want to have more of these conversations, not less. We want to recognize the real challenges that people face and not just treat this as an abstract, noble concept that we are working to fix those issues. So, as we close, I'll throw this challenge out to all of you, my viewers and my audience, to think a little bit more. See what you can do in your workplace to bring this empathy among your team members, among your leaders. That I believe could be a leadership moment for all of us. So, Rick, we are going to have more conversations about this topic in the future. Please come back whenever you have time. But I want to really thank you for being so open and candid about your experience and helping us connect the dots between the work we do and the experience that our users and patients have. So I know your alarm is beeping. You got to
All right.
probably go eat dinner. You have
Not going
yep,
any than this. It's all right. It's fine.
you got to go have dinner. So Rick, thank you again so much for coming on the show, and we will have more of this. I wish you all the best in your journey, and can't wait to really be inspired by you as we continue to talk about these topics.
Great. Well, thank you very much for having me on, Naveen. I've really enjoyed it, and anything that I can do to bring this to a wider audience and to talk about it, because I think it's in many ways I feel somewhat blessed by this new door that has opened in my life to use what has happened to me for some positivity. So the more I can do, the better.
Wonderful. Thank you again.
Thank you.